Yeah, there are actually two things that we are finding interesting about COP. First of all, we're finding that it's a very good platform to have a dialogue. So the entire world has come to Warsaw to discuss ways forward, talk about how to make a contribution in terms of improving climate change. And we see that this is a really good platform to interact with a lot of stakeholders from around the world. So that's actually one of the main drivers, or one of the main reasons why we're getting involved here. At the same time, today is actually an interesting date from a BMW Group perspective, because our BMW i3 all-electric vehicle is going on sale in Europe today. So we're also using this as a platform to talk about the solutions that the BMW Group would like to present moving forward. We're taking a very holistic approach with electric mobility. So those are really the two main reasons: to have a very open dialogue in both directions, talk about our proposed solutions, but also to absorb a lot of thought from a wide community, and at the same time to also use this as a platform to talk about what we're doing.
BMW is one of those companies where you can probably see your products in most countries in the world. I imagine there are few places where there's not a BMW, whatever its vintage, rolling about somewhere. So, you evidently have a global perspective on this. What does your company want to see from a 2015 climate deal, which is fast approaching? It doesn't seem like there's much clarity. From a transport perspective, from a business perspective, what do you want to see?
Yeah. Well, we need to have clear targets and a clear framework, and the BMW Group has taken a very serious approach in terms of reducing CO2 in our fleet. And what we've done sort of at a strategic level is trying to reduce it into two things. One is to continue improving the existing technology in sense of evolution, making existing internal combustion engines more and more efficient. But at the same time, that type of approach only gets you so far. You need to ultimately make a big jump forward, to take a big risk, and that's exactly what the BMW Group is doing in terms of our approach to sustainable mobility. We're also dealing with electric mobility, zero tailpipe emissions, because we really need that, not only as a value proposition for our customers, but also to reach and fulfill stringent legislation and targets around the world. So global challenges really need global solutions, and we think that electric mobility is a global solution that can make a significant impact towards reducing emissions and reducing CO2. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So we'd kind of really like to see a positive spirit in these discussions. Leading up to these COPs, there's a lot of, let's say, negative sentiments, maybe some doubts about the ability to actually come up with a package. We're at a halfway point leading up to Paris in 2015. So we'd like to have a very positive spirit moving into this. And obviously we're not on the negotiation table, but we'd like to use this as a platform or as an opportunity to talk about some of the solutions and some of the ideas that we have, and also get inspired by others as well.
Let's talk about the i3 range in a moment. I mean, many people would say that BMW are, in a sense, are on the negotiating table because of the company's influence, particularly within the EU. What would you say to critics who say BMW has been blocking attempts to boost the EU's transport energy efficiency targets? I think there's a move to try and get this to, I think it's 95 grams of CO2. And BMW and Daimler and other German manufacturers have been blamed, along I think with the UK, of trying to slow this process. So what's BMW's role in that, and how can you say you're a green company to an extent when you're being accused of things like that?
Well, the BMW has a very clear position concerning our CO2 stance and concerning the negotiations around the 95 grams 2020. We as a BMW Group don't question the 95 gram target. It's a question about how to reach that target as an industry as a whole. And our position really over the last months and years really hasn't changed at all. If you take the BMW Group track record up until now, from 1995 to the present in the European Union countries, we've been able to reduce the average CO2 output or increase the fuel efficiency of our new vehicle fleet by over 30%. So there's no manufacturer that's able to make that contribution at an absolute or at a relative level. So we're taking this very serious. But in order to reach the targets that are being discussed, we need to go one step further, and that step further is electric mobility. And that has really been our position, that we need to be, let's say, considering the role and contribution that electric mobility can be making. For example, CO2 emissions are capped in the energy sector. That means in the European Union, for every electric vehicle that's on the road, you're actually moving CO2 output into the energy sector, which means you're actually, through the introduction of electric mobility, making a positive contribution towards renewables. And that's really the unique thing about electric vehicles, that you're linking the electric sector to the transportation sector. So there's a big opportunity in there, which is why our position has remained stable, that we need to incentivize electric vehicles with super credits. The current 2015 CO2 legislation has super credits, but they stopped too quickly. And so our position is that we need to be using that as an instrument. And if we look to other markets, like the United States, for example, we have a super credit element in there as well. And it's really a positive position because we want to encourage the uptake of electric mobility. And that's been our position throughout all of the negotiations. And to answer your question concerning our role is really like any other stakeholder within this legislation. So it's the EU member states making contributions, it's industry making a contribution, and we take part in the negotiation process. We're trying to make every contribution we can.
Well, in terms of those EU talks, I mean, do you think that a resolution on the transport efficiency is going to be reached? It seems like it's rumbling on, and there are votes everywhere in the European Parliament and European Environment Committee. How do you see this being resolved?
Yeah. Well, the negotiations are ongoing, so I think at this point in time, we don't want to be commenting on that process at all. Our position has been quite clear.
In terms of electric vehicles, I mean, it's very much a kind of chicken and the egg scenario. Do you need more signs from government that they're going to invest in electric car infrastructure? We know that, for example, Telstra are trying to roll out a range of electric infrastructure points around the UK, but as a manufacturer, do you need to see more signs from governments, particularly in the EU, that this is something they're going to be ramping up?
Absolutely. Electric mobility is something that we can't, as the automotive industry, introduce on our own. So it is very much of a collaborative effort. We, as a BMW Group, have taken a very comprehensive and holistic approach with a BMW i sub-brand and with the BMW i3 that's going on launch as of today, and the BMW i8 that's coming early next year. But at the same time, we need to cooperate with the energy sector. We need to cooperate with infrastructure providers. We need to come up with a lot of downstream models to introduce the vehicle, where we're also taking responsibility beyond the car in terms of implementing domestic charging infrastructure, working together with public infrastructure providers so that our customers can access that charging infrastructure. And we, of course, would welcome support at an EU level in terms of introducing infrastructure and harmonizing standards.
In terms of the i3, which is the range that was at least launched, I think it was about a month ago or a month and a half ago, do you see that very much as a car which people will charge at their home and use for short journeys rather than something you would necessarily use for a longer trip?
Yeah. Well, leading up to the development of the BMW i3, we conducted very extensive field trials with an electric Mini, the Mini E, and an electric 1 Series Coupe, the BMW Active E. So we clocked up around the world over 32 million kilometers of electric driving with thousands of users. And one of the interesting findings was that range in an urban environment isn't that much of a barrier. We find that 90% of urban driving can actually be covered on a day-to-day basis with the 160 kilometers of electric range that you get out of the BMW i3. And beyond that, there are other solutions. For example, rapid charging, public infrastructure, linking to other forms of transportation. So for those occasions where you need to be traveling between cities or commuting further distances, you can rely on other types of transportations. And ultimately, what we're also doing for our BMW i3 customers is, for those periods of year where you need a car that's perhaps larger or more of a range, you can actually trade in your BMW i3 and use a conventional vehicle as well. So for every, let's say, critical question that users have asked, we've tried to come up with an answer, and we've packaged those answers into service offerings, more or less, in our package is called 360-degree electric. Yeah.
Do you sense that the whole idea of car ownership and the way that we think about vehicles is changing? I think Peugeot have launched a similar scheme with regards to being able to swap vehicles and upgrade or downgrade it depending on your range or what you want to use it for. Are humans, sort of the way we interact with cars, is it changing? Is there going to come a point where, you know, people don't really own cars, they just buy packages and are able to use whatever they want, whenever they want?
Well, it's going to still see people wanting to own cars and lease cars, but we're seeing an increasing movement towards people who want to access individual mobility. And part of our BMW Group strategy is to not only continue being the #1 premium provider of vehicles, but to become a #1 premium provider of mobility services. And we have some good examples of that, which we've implemented around the world. For example, our car sharing scheme called Drive Now. We've implemented this in German cities, in 4 German cities. The 5th city is about to come, as well as in San Francisco. And the model in Germany, for example, is a one-way car sharing system. So we have vehicles distributed in the city center, and people who subscribe to Drive Now can, through an app, locate the vehicles. It's usually no more than a couple of minutes by foot. With a chip that's located on your driver's license, you're able to activate the car, get it in, enter your personal PIN, and then drive to your destination and then park it. So that's really about accessing mobility. Another innovation that we are implementing with the BMW i3 is multimodal transportation. If you take a look at cities today, people who drive cars, people who take the bus, people who walk, and there's really not enough linking between these forms of transportation. And the navigation system in the BMW i3, for example, will be in those cities and those areas where we have that information and infrastructure multimodal, which means if you're going from A to B, the most efficient way may be with a car, but perhaps a better alternative is to drive your electric vehicle to the next charging station, charge it up, and then continue on with public transportation. So it's really about linking different forms of transportation with one another, and we think there's a lot of potential in that.
In terms of the perception of electric cars, I guess people have always seen them as maybe, you see sort of mobility scooters and milk floats. It seems there's now a greater emphasis on making them look attractive, and there's no doubt that the i3 and the i8 range do look pretty cool cars. I mean, what focus are you placing on making these not only from an environmental perspective looking good, but also from a consumer perspective? Because evidently, you're a private company and you need to make the figures add up.
I think that's one of the keys as well. Beyond reducing emissions, beyond coming up with a sustainable product, we really need to get the consumer involved and to get the consumer excited. And from our perspective, and we're in the business of offering premium products and premium solutions, the next level of premium is sustainability. So if we look at the BMW i3, we've gone to quite an extent in order to ensure sustainability in the entire value chain through a holistic approach. The vehicle has a passenger cabin that's made of carbon fiber reinforced plastic, which substantially reduces weight. That carbon fiber is made using 100% hydroelectric energy. The production of the vehicle in our plant Leipzig in Germany is made with 100% with 100% wind energy. So we're reducing the CO2 footprint throughout the entire value chain. And ultimately, we also encourage our users to use renewable and green energy as well. And in those markets where we introduce the BMW i3, we're also offering renewable energy contracts to our customers as well, because that also makes a substantial contribution towards reducing CO2 output. And all of these things, if done and practiced correctly, are good sales arguments and get people excited. And on top of it, driving an electric car is fascinating, it's fun. You have incredible torque, incredible acceleration, and the car should also look good and have excellent design as well. And some of our early users actually pioneered the phrase EV smile, the electric vehicle smile. If you've never been in an electric car, try it out, and there'll probably be a big smile on your face once you've done that.
Are you confident that the i3 and the i8 will pass the Jeremy Clarkson Top Gear test? Because he wasn't a big fan of the Telsa. Are you confident that these makes will be able to convince hardened petrol heads that this is something worth considering?
Not only are we confident, the feedback that we've received so far has actually been quite good. We've had journalists around the world testing this vehicle, and the acceleration is fantastic. The vehicle is very light, nimble, and agile. And there are a lot of unique features in the car as well. It has a very tight turning radius, for example, because the electric motor is located in the back of the vehicle, which gives more space for the front wheels to be turning. So it's very maneuverable. The car itself is very connected as well. Our users in an early stage also told us that in an urban environment we want to kind of continue life in the car as well. So the vehicle is very connected, providing a lot of real-time information. And it's an exciting drive, so I could only encourage you to take a test drive.
Just a couple more points. I mean, in terms of the company's longer-term strategy, you're obviously not going to tell me all the secrets, but in terms of expanding the share of electric cars, not just for BMW, but for other manufacturers, it evidently is tiny. It's probably going to stay that for a while yet. What is going to be key to ensuring or seeing an expansion of electric cars? Do you need governments to really rapidly roll out EV points, or is this going to be consumer-led? Do you think consumers are going to lead it, or are car manufacturers? Do you see other manufacturers saying this is our long-term future? Give us a sense about what needs to happen.
Right. Well, from a legislative perspective or a regulatory perspective, we actually see that there's a CO2 fleet legislation in place in most major markets. In some markets we have zero-emission vehicle mandates as well. Take California, for example, or the COP states. So that type of a framework, of course, encourages take-up of electric vehicles. And ultimately, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's really about getting emissions out of the transport sector. It's really about reducing CO2. And the most persuasive and the best way to go is electric vehicles, which is why we see this as a global issue. There's a lot of chicken and egg discussion around that. Do we need to have cars coming first or infrastructure? I think in this chicken and egg equation, probably the electric vehicle is the chicken, and once you get those cars out there, then implementing that infrastructure will be happening as well. And the nice thing about electric driving is you've got electricity everywhere. And of course it is a challenge in many situations to install public charging infrastructure, but it's doable, and we've got plenty of experience and examples around the world that can be done. But any help that comes in that sense, in terms of having public charging infrastructure, will help in terms of uptake. And in those markets where there is an infrastructure that's been encouraged, or where there have been incentives that are introduced, we see a corresponding very quick uptake of electric vehicles. It's not everything, but it helps.
Final question, in terms of your biggest projected market when it comes to electric vehicles, do you still see the EU as being leading on that front, or are you sensing that there are other emerging markets which perhaps see this as an opportunity to get ahead of the curve?
Yeah. Electric mobility is really a global issue, so we see a lot of potential in the United States. There's a lot of excitement based around this new technology in the US, so that's going to be a very big market for us as well. In the European market, you have a very, let's say, mature, ripe consumer base ready for this type of a sustainable solution as well, and a very high level of awareness for environmental problems and the contribution that electric vehicles can make as well. And in emerging markets, you take China for example, it's seen also as a big opportunity to do industrial leapfrogging as well, and to be part of that. So we're active in all of the major areas of the world with our EVs.